And I know that they're only halfway through, or not even halfway through their study, and they were at pains to emphasise yesterday that this isn't something that they're imposing, and it's not they're not going to negotiate it. It's just a kind of a paper, if you like. And you say you're worried maybe that it won't actually have an impact. What will it take to, does this need to be politicised, this issue? Is this something that campaigners will be taking up and highlighting certain options? I know we've had in the UK a campaign for the Robin Hood tax, and so maybe you could kind of elaborate on this a little. Where's the room for campaigners to mobilise around this issue?
Sure, I think the Robin Hood tax is a prime example of what we can kind of grab hold onto from this group. The G20's also been looking at it. George Osborne in the UK has just said he'll look at kind of doing a bank levy for the UK-based banks. But what we need to do on those types of things is make sure that we get a bit of money for climate, because what will happen is if we don't kind of campaign on it, is that all these kinds of sources and levies will go into plugging the deficit, and we want part of it to be ring-fenced for climate, because this is a debt that they owe to developing countries, basically.
And I've been asking a lot of the people we've been speaking to about various different issues, whether it's the more technical aspects or the more general process of the talks. Are you optimistic about what's happening here? Because the general consensus seems to be that it's more positive than Copenhagen. People are talking, but actually not a huge amount of progress. And is that the case when it comes to climate financing, or is it more a more positive story?
I think we're starting to see some positive. I mean, the UN is always a very incremental process, right? You never have these wham bam kind of big agreements, but I do think there is progress. It's very hard when you're sitting from the outside world to kind of think, oh my word, what they're doing, they're still watching paint dry, and it's awful. But actually, we have some quite constructive discussions here, parties trying to be engaging and not to let the kind of toxic atmosphere of Copenhagen kind of pollute the rest of this year. You can really see parties trying to make an effort, developed and developing country parties, and I think that is encouraging. But yeah, we're not going to see this kind of transformational effect over the next 6 months. I think it's going to be a long journey to South Africa, I think, before we really get down to some of the nitty-gritty. And I think one of the main problems that we have in these negotiations at the moment are very similar to the trade negotiations, which was a kind of all or nothing approach, whereby everything's so interlinked and so complicated that you can't agree that one thing without having to agree the other. And so we need to try and detangle some of these things and see if we can move ahead in a kind of incremental approach.
I guess then my final question would be, we've spoken about the importance of benchmarks as far as this actual, the funding is concerned. What's a benchmark for success in terms of these negotiations and in terms of finance? You said it's going to be an issue that's going to stretch on to South Africa probably. What needs to be achieved here? This is of course an intersessional meeting between Copenhagen and the end of year summit in Cancun in Mexico. So what do we really need to achieve before Mexico and then in Mexico in order to make sure we get a deal in South Africa?
I think there are quite a few things that we need to do. We need to firstly have a text, right? So we need to be able to know which text we're dealing off, and that will hopefully come in August, I think now. We'll get a concrete negotiating text. That's the first basis. On finance, we need to have a bit more of an understanding about the fund that was set up in the Copenhagen Accord. What does that look like? How does it interrelate with the other funds that are going on? Who has oversight? That type of thing. On the sources, it's very difficult to know, because until the advisory group kind of come out with something, their recommendations, it's then up to the parties to decide what they want to do with it. It would be fantastic if we could say we want this one, this one, and this one. Let's go to Cancun, kind of get what they call a COP decision, which is a stamp and says, yep, go forth. And I think that then you can start operationalising those throughout the next year and getting to the more nitty-gritty of what things look like in time for South Africa.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us. That's one of the clearest explanations I've had of the issue, so I really appreciate it. And I'll hand back to Anuradha and Danny in the UK.